What's up everyone, my name is Bandit, and today I'm going to be teaching you all how to play GSC 1v1, aka Gen 2 1v1. So, if you want to learn this for a tour or just for fun, pay attention because I'm going to start off with some of the quirks of the generation so you know what to expect with Gen 2. Then I'm going to jump into some of my favorite sets and teams for GSC 1v1. Without any further ado, let's hop into it with some quirks. Things that you should know about Gen 2. First and foremost, abilities, natures, and EVs do not exist. Yes, that's right, Gengar can be hit with Earthquake because there are no abilities whatsoever. No natures means you don't have to worry about, oh, is it plus speed or plus attack or plus defense nature? No, everything has the stats that it has. Damage is very, very predictable in this generation. Choice items, Eviolite, stat boosting berries, and resist berries do not exist. They are not in the picture. The berries we do have are named differently. Lumberry is called Miracle Berry, Chesto Berry is called Mint Berry, but otherwise they work the exact same way. Items that slightly boost the power of one type of move, like Miracle Seed, Charcoal, Twisted Spoon, Black Belt, they boost by 1.1 times instead of 1.2 times. This means that they're pretty niche, but there are some Pokemon that do need that little boost to get an important 1 or 2 hit KO. For EVs, you can max out all the EVs at once, just 252s across the board. We use DVs instead of IVs, which cap out at 15 instead of 31, but otherwise work the exact same way. Speed DVs can be lowered to break speed ties in the case of Umbreon and Misdreavus that want to be using Toxic or Curse after the opponent uses Rest. Pokemon being shiny or female requires reduced DVs. Boosting moves only continue raising a stat until the cap of 999 is reached, at which point they stop increasing. The exception here is Marowak with an attack stat so high thanks to Thick Club that one Swords Dance will actually send it past the attack cap, past 1024 and wrapping back around to a low number. This is the reason for the special EVs and DVs in the set comp. So really quick, if you're going to use a Marowak without hidden power, let's say you've got like Swords Dance, Bone Meringue, Rock Slide, and Counter. That's pretty good non-hidden power Marowak set. What you want to do is go down to 240 attack or 255 total attack. This will prevent you from wrapping past that attack cap after Swords Dance. It'll keep your attack maximized. If you are using hidden power, you don't have to worry about this. Let's say you're using HP Bug to hit Executor, it will automatically set your attack DV to the right number so that it doesn't wrap past that attack cap. So now you know, Marowak just reduce its attack very slightly so that you don't have to worry about wrapping back to 0. Yeah, that's the reason for the set comp sets. Maximum PP for a move is 61. Recoil damage, including struggle, is a quarter of the damage you deal with the move. Crash damage is 1/8 of the damage it would have dealt. So recoil and crash damage, very, very, very toned down this gen. Struggle damage is very tiny. Double edge recoil is very tiny. Those moves are very spammable. Critical hit damage doubles the Pokemon's level in the calculations, not the damage dealt. Crits also ignore stat mods, burn damage, and screens. And they are very common. It's 1/16th chance to crit in this gen. So crits do a ton of damage, they're very common, critical hits are big in Gen 2. End of turn effects, Poison, Leech Seed, and Leftovers apply when a Pokemon is done with its attack potentially in the middle of a turn. It's not like both Pokemon attack and then there's end of turn effects. Instead, end of turn is just the end of that Pokemon's turn. Sandstorm does 1/8 instead of 1/16th damage. Moves with guaranteed secondary effects like Icy Wind and Thief have a 1 in 256 chance to not trigger at all. This is hilarious when it happens. Growth is the only special attack boosting move in the game in Gen 2. This makes some Pokemon like Politoed actually really strong because they have access to growth. Vaporeon is another good example of a very good growth user. Substitute is not available for most Johto Pokemon because it was a TM in Gen 1, but not in Gen 2. Protect fails from used behind a substitute. This is important for Leech Seed stallers. Do not try to protect from behind a substitute. Absorbing moves like Giga Drain and Leech Seed will all miss against substitute. Sometimes you can cheese Pokemon like Venusaur and Exeggutor if you have substitute on a faster Pokemon. They try to Leech Seed or Giga Drain and they're stopped right in their tracks. You can successfully Sleep Talk Rest while you're asleep, which will restore your health and reset your sleep turns. GSC OU players will be very, very familiar with this mechanic. Moves called by other moves like Sleep Talk cannot be countered or mirror-coded. And Encore and Disable. Encore is amazing. It lasts 3 to 6 turns. Disable is terrible. It has 55% accuracy and lasts 1 through 7 turns. And lastly, Low Kick is not based on weight. It's a 50 BP fighting move with a 30% flinch chance. Conversion 2, used by Porygon 2, is blocked by Protect. And Belly Drum boosts attack by 2 when it fails. These are all the weird little things about GSC that it's really nice to know before you try to jump in and get surprised by them. So yeah, that pretty much does it for the quirks of the gen. Now let's jump into some of my very favorite movesets and teams. Alright, so here are some sample sets that I put together. I'm going to go ahead and talk about a couple important ones and where they show up in my teams. I think that's a good way to do this. So at the top of the list is Alakazam. Alakazam dominates this tier because it has Encore, it's super fast, it's got Psychic, and it can choose to beat physical attackers, special attackers, or status users. That's basically its whole thing. It loses big time to things like Tyranitar that can crunch it. It loses to Heracross that can Mega Horn it. Barrier is not enough to stop those at all. So in practice, what does this look like? I'm going to go ahead and just search Alakazam. So we've got all my Alakazam teams. This is a good example. Light Screen Alakazam to beat special attackers. This is a good check to Raikou, a good check to Moltres and Charizard, and just things that expect to blow through, weaker psychic types. This is something that you're going to want to have if you are weak to special attackers. If you're weak to physical attackers, I would say go for the Barrier set. This is going to be probably the strongest overall set in the attacking metagame, like before people get too interested in the status game. I think Barrier is probably the best Alakazam for beating regular things like Marowak and like Ursaring and Tauros, etc. So yeah, Barrier Alakazam, very strong. And also, I did mention Status Zam. Status Sam with Toxic and Miracle Berry is fantastic at taking on things like Exeggutor and Blissey. These guys often want to Toxic or Paralyze it, and Miracle Berry prevents that. It gets its own Toxic off and can pretty much just recover stall, while keeping Psychic Encore for things that don't super threaten it, like Marowak or Moltres. So yeah, Alakazam, very, very strong. Also Raikou, very, very strong. These are the two S ranks. Raikou and Alakazam. Raikou is so good because it's, once again, very, very fast, and it can tech a lot of different things. Typically, it'll be running some variation of Thunderbolt, Crunch, Rest, and Filler. I really like Reflect Magnet because Reflect Magnet lets you take on Heracross reliably. You can Reflect turn 1 on Curse, and then you can 2-hit KO it with Thunderbolt, and you don't have to worry about dying to Earthquakes. So Magnet, Thunderbolt for Heracross is good, but Leftovers is honestly probably the best set. It's not a good one. This is a good one. Thunderbolt, Crunch, Rest, and then Toxic is nice to win Toxic Wars. If you don't like the Toxic playstyle, you can also go for moves like Thunder. Psych Up is actually pretty good to deal with the Crunch Mirrors, or it can help you deal with Jolteon that's trying to Growth on you. Also, Hidden Powers work pretty well here. I like Hidden Power Fire, Ice. And then another good move is actually Protect. Protect seems a little bit underwhelming, but sometimes that extra Leftovers regen can be really, really, really nice. Yeah, Raikou has got some good options, and it can even run a Curse return set. Now this set is pretty funny because it actually lets you deal with the mirror really well. You can Curse versus other Raikou that are trying to land crunch drops, and you can actually kill them with return faster than they'll crunch you to death. So pretty interesting set. Raikou's got a lot of cool options. It's a very fun Pokemon to use, and it's deceptively bulky with leftovers. So moving on to Blissey, the absolute terror of the gen. Blissey has 3 main sets that it runs that I can kind of just cover right here in PokePaste. The first one being Counter Curse. Shout out to Merman for this set. Basically, the idea is you boost up your defensive stats alongside your opponent boosting their offensive stats, and then when they try to finally attack you, you just counter them. The alternatives to this are Defense Curl counter if you're not using an offensive move yourself. Personally, I think that Curse Double-Edge Blissey is fantastic. That's pretty much the best way to be using Blissey. But if you prefer to use Seismic Toss, Ice Beam, if you're one of those Blissey players, that's understandable. Defense Curl is a viable option. And then there's also the anti-Marowak Blissey. With Ice Beam and Blizzard, this can 2-hit KO the Swords Dancing Marowak that expects to beat you. You've got your choice of Soft Boiled and Rest, Toxic, S-Toss. You know, Blissey has a lot of good physical, special, and status moves. Really, there's no shortage of options for Blissey, and it's a very, very polarizing Pokemon in this metagame. Let's see if I've got some Blissey teams. I do like using Psych Up, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt to deal with growth users. Typically, things like Growth Jolteon or Growth Vaporeon can try to cheese Blissey since it's a pretty passive attacker. They can growth up all the way and hit it with their maxed out special attacks, but Psych Up pretty much prevents that. Scope Lens is actually a very viable set, if you ask me. This is the Skarm Bliss sample. I'll link all of the sample sets and sample teams in the description. This is one of my favorite samples. It was the first one that I put together. Curse Double-Edge Blissey with that chance to crit is actually fantastic because, as I mentioned before, crits are super powerful this gen, and a double-edge crit coming off of a fully boosted Blissey will one-shot a lot of things. So, lots of good options for Blissey. It's a very, very strong, bulky Pokemon. I do recommend using it. Executor is probably the premier Leech Seeder of this gen, alongside Venusaur. I like Executor a little bit better because of its very spammable Psychic. I think Psychic plus Protect plus Leech Seed is pretty much the best possible combo for Executor. It gets a lot of healing with Leech Seed, Protect, and Leftovers. If I search, Executor team, oh my god, can I not? I've got a sample team with that set that I mentioned, Leech Seed, Psychic, and Protect. Substitute lets you deal with things like Crunch Raikou very, very nicely, so you don't have to worry about those special defense drops. And this thing just regens so much HP. It's a very archetypal drain tank character, basically. You can also do some funky stuff with Silver Powder, HP Bug, if you really want to win the Mirror or the Alakazam matchup. But generally, Leftovers is by far your best option with Executor. Moving on to Heracross. Heracross is so good. I love using Heracross in GSC 1v1 because it deals phenomenally well with Raikou that isn't teching it, Alakazam because you tank Psychic and you KO with Mega Horn. Curse Rest is fantastic. You beat Toxic users, you beat other Curse users. And although you do lack a strong fighting stab, you do have options in Hidden Power Fighting and Reversal. So its options are limited, but not non-existent. I also kind of like the Black Belt set with Reversal that will KO Marowak after you successfully endure on HP Flying. So Heracross does have some counterplay versus HP Flying users, despite being 4 times weak. Moving on to some other fighting types, Machamp is really cool in this gen because it has Encore alongside Scary Face. This is a devastating combo. If something uses something that isn't an offensive move, it can be locked forever into that non-offensive move and killed eventually with Cross Chop or Fire Blast or whatever other move you choose. I like Earthquake for electric types. Sadly, you cannot run Encore alongside Rock Slide. So you do have to choose Encore or Rock Slide, and generally in 1v1, Encore is a lot better, especially if you're using it alongside Speed Control. If you don't want to do the Speed Control game, you also have options with Curse. Curse, Quake, Cross Chop is a pretty strong set as well, dealing well with things like Raikou. Moving on to Marowak. Marowak I've already gone over a little bit when I mentioned the EV stuff, but it's basically running its choice of Boomerang or Earthquake, and its fourth move. It can use Counter, Hyper Beam, Dynamic Punch for Tyranitar, Flamethrower for Skarmory, Blizzard for Dragonite and Jumpluff. You basically just pick one extra threat that you want to beat with your last move, and you've got your first three. Hidden powers are very strong on Marowak. You can generally take out You can take out fighting types, you can take out grass types, psychic types. Marowak is a very, very threatening physical attacker in this gen. Starmie is super good. I love Starmie. Starmie is probably one of my top 5 Pokemon. In this gen, I love using Coverage Starmie. I think that Surf, Psychic, T-Bolt, Ice Beam hits so many things super effectively. It's really hard to not want to use this. Also, you can use Mystic Water, Rain Dance, Thunder to beat other water types and hit crazy hard with Hydro Pump. The last set that I would bring up would be Substitute Starmie, which can fish for status attacks or low accuracy attacks and come out on top a lot of the time, since it can use Substitute so many times with leftovers. The last few Pokemon in the A+ rank are Tyranitar, Vaporeon, and Venusaur. So Tyranitar is great because it is very, very anti-meta. Screech, Rock Slide, Earthquake, Crunch, Ice Beam. This thing can take on a whole lot of things you wouldn't expect it to. Ice Beam, notably, 2-hit KOs Marowak most of the time, turning that matchup on its head. Crunch is great versus Psychic types, Earthquake is great versus Electric types, Rock Slide great versus Flying types, and Screech lets you take on Curse users and Reflect users, and anything that isn't, threatening you super effectively already. Tyranitar does very, very well against a lot of the sample teams. I highly recommend, if you're trying to beat the samples, that you look into Tyranitar. And then the other two that I brought up were the growth users. We have Vaporeon, which goes really, really well with physical attackers, because you can cover that special side, and it also has Acid Armor, which is amazing versus opposing physical attackers. Vaporeon and Politoed are basically the growth bros this gen, Vaporeon getting Acid Armor and Politoed getting Amnesia. Otherwise, they function identically. To break away from that a little bit, we have Venusaur. Venusaur is a growth user that has a ton of other options. I actually don't have any Venusaur teams right now, but I will talk about all of the ways it can be used. You can use full Seed Stall, you can use Swords Dance, you can use Curse, or you can use Growth. It has all of the different boosting options, and it performs well with any of them. Venusaur, yeah, tons of options. It's a very viable Pokemon. I should have teams with it to show off, but I don't right now. Very sad. Articuno is a very cool Pokemon. It only needs this one set to beat pretty much everything. Reflect beats every relevant physical attacker, and it can use all 3 ice moves to very, very strong effect to cover things like Alakazam, grass types, and fighting types. Jolteon is pretty nice. It's basically just faster Raikou with growth. It can also Toxic Stall to some degree, but really you want to be using Mint Berry Growth. That is by far the best set for Jolteon. Shows up on RTM's sample. Mint Berry Growth, very, very powerful when combined with a physical attacker. Jumpluff is great. It's the best Leech Staller after Venusaur and Exeggutor. It's got a couple of options, but I'm just going to glaze past them. Skarmory is a phenomenal physical wall. Honestly, Skarmory is like one of the best Gluemons in this gen. It can Toxic Stall to great effect with Protect, Mint, Rest, or it can Curse. It's got good options versus like Marowak and other physical attackers. Tauros is very nice because it's very fast. Tauros is cool because it can actually curse and still remain faster than other things. It also has access to Fire Blast, which is huge for a physical attacker. As I mentioned, you have 252 special attack EVs that are doing nothing else, so might as well tech on a Fire Blast while you can. Ursaring, a little bit slower, a little bit more powerful. I think Ursaring is a pretty dominant threat in this metagame because it can 1 or 2 hit KO mostly anything after a boost. It also has Slash to crit through barrier users and curse users. I think Slash Ursaring is hugely underrated, very strong at taking on things like Barrier Alakazam. Dragonite is phenomenal with a mixed set with Hidden Power Flying. Outrage is actually fairly bad. I would recommend not using Outrage. Instead, I would say use Hidden Power Flying, Ice Beam, Icy Wind, Surf, Thunderbolt, and Fire Blast. Those are really the good moves to be using. Leftovers is fine, but honestly, I would recommend looking into Scope Lens. Scope Lens Dragonite can crit past a lot of its checks, like Vaporeon, and that's really nice for it. It can even cheese Alakazam with Hidden Power Dark, although I would recommend using a more solid Alakazam check. Entei is pretty underwhelming for a fire type. I'd say just use Moltres or Houndoom instead for the most part, because you're not really effectively cheesing water types. Solar Beam is pretty underwhelming. Steelix is good because it's so bulky, but it's also very predictable. You know exactly what Steelix is going to do. It can carry Hidden Power Flying, which is cool versus Heracross. Yeah, Steelix is pretty self-explanatory. Charizard is pretty much overshadowed by Moltres, but it can do some physical attacking stuff, which is kind of neat. Gengar is more powerful as a 3 attacks user or as a Toxic Staller than it is as a Curse Pokemon, because Curse is going to have your HP and you're going to die to any Earthquake that touches you. Gyarados is pretty neat. I would recommend stepping away from the Leftovers set and towards the Mystic Water set so that you can actually beat Tyranitar, because it kind of does suck to lose to Tyranitar. But it's got some good options. It can use, a lot of special attacks alongside its physical flying stab. Hitmonlee never gets used, don't worry about that. Jinx pretty much never gets used, don't worry about that either. It's just worse Alakazam or worse Articuno. Kingdra is amazing. I love Kingdra. I think Kingdra is a supremely underrated Pokemon in GSC. Surf, Ice Beam, Toxic, Protect. This thing can Toxic Stall very effectively, it can Surf very effectively, and it has virtually no weaknesses. You're really only weak to dragon attacks, which don't really exist other than Outrage, which is very, very rare. So Kingdra actually can use the fact that it has no real weaknesses to even use a curse set. That's how good Kingdra is. Moltres is great. It's better than Charizard. It's the hardest hitting special attacker in the metagame, mirroring Ursaring as the hardest hitting physical attacker. Nidoking is cool, although it does kind of want Soft Sand for Tyranitar, getting that nice 2-hit KO with Earthquake. It is a roll with Leftovers, but it's got some cool options in Amnesia and Ice Beam and Rest. Suicune is good on paper, pretty underwhelming in practice if you ask me. It's a very solid B-ish rank Pokemon. Arcanine is cool because it can tech Alakazam. Houndoom is cool because it can beat Alakazam and lots of other things. Meganium is a very solid B-rank Pokemon. It's basically worse Venusaur in most aspects. Politoed, once again, basically very similar to Vaporeon, but slightly worse stat-wise. Porygon 2 has a couple of options with its Conversion 2, and it's got some Ice Beam, Thunder Wave stuff, but it's alright. I would generally prefer to use something like Blissey. Primeape is very fast, and it's got a very nice Hidden Power Flying or Thunderbolt that it can use against Gyarados or Heracross. So Primeape is actually a very underrated threat, if you ask me. Scizor is rated perfectly at the low Bs. It's a bug, it's slow, it's bulky, but it's not super powerful other than that. Slowbro and Slowking are both very good. I do recommend using both Slowbro and Slowking. They're very bulky, they've got good coverage, and they can basically deal with a lot of things as a third Pokemon on a team. They're good Glumons that cover rock types and ground types. Umbreon I think is underrated. It's a pretty good Toxic Staller. It has some boosting options with Growth and Curse, but I would really step away from the Nightmare set. I feel like Nightmare is better utilized on Pokemon like Exeggutor. Dodrio is decent, but it cannot combine Flail with Substitute. Espeon is pretty bad. It can growth, but it's pretty frail. Electabuzz is, it's alright. Electabuzz and Magmar are neat because they can use the combo of Screech and Cross Chop to crit through Tyranitar and Blissey while being special attackers. Miltank is pretty bad. Muck is pretty bad. Sorry, Doc. Piloswine might have some potential if people start running rock moves on it. I don't know. Raichu is good in theory, but no one has successfully used it yet. I think Endure Reversal is very, very strong. This is a good move set for this Pokemon. Slowking should be a little bit higher up. It's basically on par with Slowbro, and it does deal with Tyranitar better than its counterpart. Typhlosion is pretty bad. Victreebel is pretty weak. It's just not bulky enough to really tank any hits. And then we get into the low-ranked Pokemon that you really don't have to worry about so much. Aerodactyl exists, but it's very weak. It doesn't really KO anything. Clefairy has this moveset to watch out for, which is Thunder Wave Encore. Clefairy's kind of too frail to make this set work, but this moveset on Clefable is ban-worthy, easily. It was banned. Golduck is just like its fire and electric counterparts, Electabuzz and Magmar, but it already beats rock types, so Screech and Cross Chop are less effective. Golem is at least better than Rhydon, and it shuts down electric and fire types, but, you know, it's Golem. It's kind of meh. Hypno also pretty meh, gets crit a lot in this gen. Lapras is pretty bad, Misdreavus is pretty bad. Mr. Mime is actually good. I don't know why Mr. Mime is so low here. Mime has a lot of freedom to combine moves. Alakazam is oftentimes limited in combining things like Encore and Counter, or Encore and Seismic Toss, and Mr. Mime has none of these limitations. Poliwrath is a pretty niche option, but some people really like using it. Quagsire is pretty bad because it can't beat Marowak, but otherwise it does function as you would expect. Scyther beats Psychic types. Smeargle beats slow things. Tentacruel can also run Barrier here, and it's a pretty decent physical lure with Barrier, if you ask me. Blossom is pretty much worse Meganium. Blastoise is pretty much worse other water type. Chansey is worse Blissey, etc. These are the Pokemon that you don't really have to worry about at all. Donphan is... it can kind of beat Marowak as a ground type, which is cool, but otherwise doesn't do anything. Pretty much that's the tier that we're in now, is these Pokemon can kind of do one thing. Mantine is actually pretty neat. It can deal with Alakazam, Marowak, and Tyranitar. Rhydon is slightly worse Golem because of its poor special defense stat. And now we're at the point where I'm looking at Shuckle. So I think we're pretty much done looking at movesets. Let's go on to some of my favorite teams. I'm going to start off with some of the sample teams that I put together for this tier. If you guys haven't played GSC 1v1 before, I highly recommend checking out these teams. They're very good at teaching the meta, and they're very solid all around. Leftovers Raikou is phenomenal. You don't have to use Psych Up. That's pretty unintuitive for a new player. Thunder is a great option, so is Reflect. Raikou, Blissey, and Skarm is basically GSC OU condensed down to 3 Pokemon. Blissey and Skarm are famously an amazing duo that can stand in front of almost anything. The only big threats here are going to be things like Marowak, and Skarmory can stall out Marowak with the combination of Toxic, Protect, and Mintberry Rest. So once again, Mintberry acts like Chesto Berry, restores your status after resting. Drill Peck deals with things like Heracross that threaten Blissey and Raikou. And yeah, it's a very, very solid core. I did mention Scope Lens Double Edge as a very good way to break other Pokemon. Blissey's very hard to deal with this set. You have to bring something specifically to counter it. Typically a Toxic, Encore, Alakazam, or something like that. So yeah, very good team. Try this one. And also try the other Raikou samples. Gara and Marowak form a really nice core because Marowak absorbs all the electric attacks that would be normally aimed at Gyarados. I love Mystic Hydro Pump as a 2-hit KO on Tyranitar. Substitute is great versus Giga Drain, Leech Seed users. HP Flying is super cool because it does the job of basically Hidden Power Flying and Hidden Power Bug on any other Pokemon. Because HP Flying deals with Heracross and HP Bug deals with Executor. But in this case, you actually get Stab on HP Flying, so you get to deal with Executor and Heracross with one move. Marowak is running Ice Beam or Blizzard to deal with Dragonite and Jumpluff. That's what that's for. And then Raikou is running the Crunch Rest Reflect set. I believe this is the best all-around Raikou set, especially if you expect to be dealing with physical attackers. And I believe there is one more Raikou sample, which is this one. Alakazam, Machamp, and Raikou. This is going to be physically defensive Alakazam, able to take on things like Hidden Power Flying Marowak with ease. Machamp is here to deal with electric types with its Earthquake. And it's got Curse. This one isn't running Scary Face because it doesn't really need it. You can kind of just Curse up once and then win with your physical attacks. Cross Chop's high crit rate is really huge in this gen. And Encore is really nice, especially if you can predict what a faster Pokemon is going for. If you expect your opponent's Raikou to go for a Reflect turn 1, you can lock them into that and then crit through it, winning the matchup. It's always nice. Raikou, this one's running Thunder for the damage, but once again, it has a lot of options in that final slot. So yeah, typically a team will have some sort of structure like this: physical attacker, special attacker, and glue. The glue Pokemon does the job of just covering every other possible matchup that the physical and special duo can't deal with. I have a couple other samples before I jump into some of my favorite non-samples. I would like to talk about the Heracross sample. I think Hidden Power Fighting Heracross is easily the most comfortable Heracross to use. You don't have to get fancy with timing of reversal or anything like that. You just click the fighting move versus the normal rock and dark types, and you don't think too hard about it. Megahorn beats Alakazam, and it beats Executor, and it's your best stab. Curse Rest is phenomenal versus other Curse users, versus defensive boosters, and toxic users. I mentioned this is the best Executor set, but if you want to give up Substitute for something like Giga Drain, or even Hidden Power Grass to hit Substitute, that's a viable option as well. Vaporeon is going to run pretty much this exact set almost always. This is anti-physical, boost up, and kill things with Surf. If you don't want to use Surf because you're against like Dragonite or something and you really want an Ice move instead, this set does the exact same thing with a little bit less damage in most other situations. So Vaporeon has a couple of options. You could even run Icy Wind, but I think overall the best is going to be that the Acid Armor set. So this team, honestly, probably my favorite of the samples I've put together. I love using Heracross. It's super, super anti-meta. Even with HP Fighting, HP Fighting does have the downside of very low HP. You're not going to be beating Raikous with this set, even if you throw on Earthquake. But that is Executor's job with the Leech Seed Protect. This was sub. Gonna leave it like that. And now let's go into some of my personal favorite teams. These are teams that I didn't build as samples. They're just teams that I love to use in tours. This is my favorite team. Magnet Thunderbolt Raikou to beat Heracross. Starmie with Substitute to maximize odds versus low accuracy moves. There's a lot of Megahorns running around that can be easily stalled out until a miss. I think your odds are actually pretty nice versus opposing Heracross with this set. Heracross itself is a crazy attacker. You can give up a fighting move in favor of Toxic and still beat things like Blissey that you would normally be using that fighting move against. You still retain a super effective move versus dark types like Heracross, or like Tyranitar, so Heracross is still useful in that matchup. This team, I love this team. It's very, very effective in a tour setting, in a best-of-5 setting. Same thing with Mono Psychic. Once again, that Substitute Protect Starmie. This is my very favorite Starmie set. So yeah, if you want to cheese some low accuracy moves, cheese some Giga Drainers, Substitute Starmie is a great way to do that. And this team is very, very special because it's Mono Psychic. You've got Light Screen Alakazam to deal with like Crunch Raikou, Crunch users. You've got Mr. Mime to deal with physical attackers. If there's like a Ursaring or something, you just counter that. T-Wave Encore is a hilarious combo. You can slow down things that try to boost and lock them into it. Yeah, this team, it looks kind of silly, Mono Psychic, but it's incredibly solid, and it's won a couple tours at this point. Tyrannocuno, check this team out. I love this team. It uses the very standard Articuno, very standard Tyranitar, very standard Raikou. It's all standard sets, but they fit together so unbelievably nicely. Tyranitar and Raikou are both checked by grass types, which Articuno comes and destroys. Articuno and Raikou both checked by things like Marowak, which Tyranitar destroys with Ice Beam. And then Raikou checks the water types that deal with Articuno and Tyranitar. So the team has very, very nice synergy, very nice internal synergy. It's using basically the best possible sets for each Pokemon. I highly recommend this team if you want something very strong all around that not everybody knows. King Pluff. Jumpluff is super cool, you guys. Jumpluff is extreme. Unfortunately, it can use Synthesis, but Rest is very, very nice to beat Toxic. Toxic running around a good amount, always nice to have an answer for that. Leech Protect, it's a Leech Staller. You know what it does. Gen 2, so it doesn't get Substitute, but Encore more than makes up for that. Miracle Berry on Tyranitar is super cool. You can deal with things like Stun Spore Executor, and you kind of don't need leftovers. You don't need a boosting item, so it's kind of a good opportunity to use that Lum slot. You can Screech to lower defenses for opposing Curse users, opposing Reflect users. Kill them with your physical moves, kill Psychic types with Crunch, and then Kingdra. With that Toxic Stall set that I mentioned earlier, you can run Sub here, but I actually really, really like Protect. And you also deal with things like opposing Jumpluff and opposing Marowak very, very nicely. Once again, a very solid all-around team. If you want to use Gengar, but you don't want to use that lame Curse set, I recommend Toxic, Sub, Protect, and Spite. Why Spite? Because it beats Rest. Your opponent tries to rest off Toxic damage, and then they lose all their PP for Rest, and they lose the game. Very fun set to use, very unexpected when people see Gengar and think Curse, or they see Gengar and think special attacks. I think Toxic Stall is definitely the way to go here. This is non-hidden power fighting Heracross. You'll notice that there is an Earthquake on this set for Raikou. It gets a little bit dicey, but it can make it work unless it's the Reflect Magnet set. And then lastly, we have Starmie. Coverage Starmie is fantastic. If you're not sold on the Substitute Starmie, I highly recommend putting Coverage on to beat other water types, to beat dragon types, flying types. Starmie can hit everything super effectively, and it's very fast and it's very strong. So, yeah, highly recommend Starmie. Let's see. This is a cool team. Slowbro can psych up versus some boosters. It's got good coverage. Shadow Ball hits Alakazam. Nidoking with Soft Sand always 2-hit KOs Tyranitar. Toxic is used the same way as on Heracross versus Blissey to force Rest, and then you can Curse up and Quake it without fearing counter. Raikou, this is actually the anti-Raikou for people that want to try and pick a mirror into the Raikou Slowbro. It's a decent team. Not my best team, but it's up there. This one's pretty cool. I'm pretty big on Psych Up users. Psych Up is a move that kind of sucks when you first start playing because it's not really clear when you should be using it, but once you get really deep into the gen, Psych Up becomes fantastic. There's a lot of things that try to boost up just enough to tank your moves and KO you back, and Psych Up just totally shuts that down. This set specifically beats Politoed, which would otherwise kind of roll over this. Politoed and Vaporeon both get ruined by Psych Up Thunderbolt. Scizor is kind of neat. I like Counter Curse. Once again, shout out to Merman. Boosting your defense and then countering your opponent's boosted attack is pretty nice. Rest doesn't do anything for Toxic since you're a Steel type, but you need some form of recovery, and Roost doesn't exist yet. And Hidden Power Bug because you're Scizor. Same thing going on with Golem, but it's a rock. Beats fire types. Yeah, all these teams will be linked in the description if you want to use them or take inspiration from them. And we'll go over one more team, the most cursed team that I can find. This is Toxic Stall Umbreon. Gets beat by Rest users, but who cares? Miss Drevis with 4 normal moves. Growl to lower attack, Pain Split to survive forever, Screech to lower opponent's defense, and Return to eventually KO through that defense. This set beats Blissey. It's pretty whack. It's pretty damn whack, I'm not going to lie, but Growl Miss Drevis is too funny not to show. And then one more time, a Psych Up user. We have Blissey with Ice Beam and Thunderbolt to deal with Vaporeon, Politoed, and Jolteon as well. So there you go. A very cursed stall team to sum up a very cursed generation of Pokemon. Screw it. I'll show the anti-sample team as well. If you guys notice that a lot of people are using the sample teams, take a look at some Miracle Berry Tyranitar action. Take a look at some Xatu action. Xatu is notable as the only Psychic type to reliably beat Heracross. Confuse Ray is probably pretty bad. I would recommend using any other move instead. Raikou is always an excellent choice. I hope this has been enlightening in terms of what the tier looks like. And I think the best way to finish off this video is going to be to show some actual battles with these teams. So yeah, let's see some matches. thank you all so much for watching. I hope you learned something about Gen 2 1v1, and I hope to see you again next time.